Wrestling Bios. He has some really good stuff. Y'all go check out Wrestling Bios. See, this guy put some stuff together. Looking back at WWE's Self-Destruction, The Ultimate Warrior. I had this DVD when it first came out. I remember another dude. I think he said he wasn't the biggest Warrior fan, but still, he said that was disgusting. Said it was like a hit job. I call it like the ultimate burial session. Because they probably talked decent about the man for 5 minutes, maybe. And if I had known what the DVD was going to be back then, I probably would have left it where it was. Because, like, damn. And they said they were supposed to do one on Brett, which I don't know about that. But, Warrior made his mark now, like him or not. Let's see how he, together, what he thinks about that DVD. This guy be putting them together, boy. My lunch.
Documentaries, DVDs, and Blu-rays produced by WWE are known to sometimes exaggerate certain situations or embellish things to make the subject matter a little more interesting, or sometimes truths can get stretched so much that the information available just becomes flat-out lies. Fans can sometimes get a WWE version of events as the company rewrites history to suit themselves, but generally speaking, the documentaries put out by WWE try to place the company and their history of superstars in a good light. Sometimes fans can see through it, and sometimes fans run with a retold narrative for years and years. One DVD, though, released in 2005, went in the complete opposite direction. The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior has been described as a hit piece by the WWE that didn't necessarily deconstruct the Ultimate Warrior, but it deconstructed the man playing the character, Jim Hellwig. Once upon a time, the WWF presented the Ultimate Warrior as the company's top babyface. He headlined WrestleMania, he won the WWF Championship, he sold a ton of merchandise, and he once captivated viewers young and old with his eccentric character and no-nonsense ring style. But WWE went out of their way to tarnish Warrior's WWF history, and as Bruce Pritchard put it, WWF would announce to fans that, hey, here's the guy we presented, but here's the guy he really was. It's been said that Warrior was approached by WWE in regards to contributing to this documentary. Warrior refused, and so WWE went ahead and refused. Show that pretty much buries him. Before going on, I know people are split when it comes to the Ultimate Warrior, and that means people will also be split about this DVD release. The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior is interesting when it comes to Warrior detractors, because on one hand, you've got a guy who had a few questionable takes, to say the least, but on the other hand, you've got the company he worked for and the company he made money for getting a little petty by releasing this DVD. Yeah. Either way, the plan today is just to watch the DVD again and take a look at some of the more interesting aspects of the show, and you can make your own mind up. When I go through this DVD, by the way, it's going to sound like I'm taking shots at Warrior, but I'm simply going to say it as I see it and recap the documentary. A documentary that is not currently available on WWE Network, and it probably never will be.
Nobody wants to get on. Leave this alone.
The DVD opens up like any typical WWE documentary of the time, with highlights accompanied by the Warriors theme music, and you wouldn't think anything was amiss here. Our first talking head is Jim Ross. He says muscular physiques were getting in fashion during the 80s, and Hellwig was a head turner, as was his tag partner Steve Borden. Jerry Lawler says Hellwig and Borden were green as grass when they came to Memphis, but Lawler knew he'd be seeing both guys again down the road. Memphis, however, wasn't a suitable territory for these two because they still needed to learn their craft. Ross says Hellwig and Borden would become the Blade Runners, a rip-off of the Road Warriors. Ted DiBiase echoes what Lawler says. The Blade Runners looked great, but they were young and they were very, very green. This is nothing you would expect to hear in any WWE documentary, to be fair, and it's been well established that both Warrior and the Stinger needed to work on their in-ring abilities when they first broke in. Things are moving along very fast, though. We're already at the Dingo Warrior in world class, and we immediately skip to Bruce Pritchard saying Warrior called WWF looking for a job. Vince McMahon says Hellwig didn't really know what he was doing, but he had a lot of heart and a lot of ambition. Pritchard says Jim was given a chance and he was put in a few non-televised matches. And then we see Dingo Warrior making appearances in Houston Wrestling, and we see his debut in the Boston Garden in 1987. Bobby Heenan and McMahon put over Warrior's great look, his presence and his natural charisma here. McMahon does make fun of the Dingo Warrior name though, but to be fair, it is a dumb name. Pritchard says the name Warrior was supposed to get completely dropped.
Ultimate Warrior was way better.
Warriors and the modern day Warrior, Kerry Von Erich. But McMahon thought this new Warrior could exist as more than those previous Warriors. He was better than those Warriors. He was the best Warrior. He was the Ultimate Warrior. Gene Okerlund talks about the Ultimate Warrior getting popular right out the gate in WWF when his TV run truly began. Steve Lombardi says he worked a lot of Warrior's first matches and he got legit knocked out a few times while working with Jim, so yeah, he still wasn't a great worker in the ring. We then focus on Warrior's entrance music, and Chris Jericho talks about how good it was and how good the entrance was. Indeed, Warrior did have one of the most exciting entrances in wrestling at the time. Edge and Christian also talk about how good the entrance was, and Jim Ross says credit has to go to Jim Johnston because a lot of Warrior's success came from his high energy, frenetic rock music. Johnston says it's a very basic piece of music in terms of composition, but
that guy made the best theme music. He did.
And just like that, all the praise gets flushed away when Jericho, Edge, and Sergeant Slaughter talk about the Warrior being exhausted when he got to the ring. Ted DiBiase says the fans loved it, but then the wrestlers would say to each other, well, now you've seen it, and now it's over. Jim Ross and Bobby Heenan echoed DiBiase's statement by saying there was a lot of sizzle before Warrior got to the ring, but that's as far as it went when it came to the Ultimate Warrior as a professional wrestler. We move into the Hercules versus Warrior feud, and Ted DiBiase says neither man had any real wrestling ability, though Hercules was better. Still though, it was the blind leading the blind according to the $1 Million Man, and Warrior really needed someone to lead him in the ring. Ross keeps it simple and he says the Hercules matches were very hard to watch. The show then moves on to Heenan's Weasel suit. Bobby reminds fans that the Weasel suit made its debut in the AWA before revealing he wanted Hulk Hogan to be the one who puts him in the suit in WWF. McMahon though wanted the Warrior, so Heenan went along with it. Bobby says Warrior would never listen in the ring, he wouldn't slow down when told to do so, and everything was rushed. In short, Bobby Heenan did not like working with the Ultimate Warrior. Guys interviewed for the DVD then make fun of Warrior being from parts unknown, with Chris Jericho coming up with a crazy fictional story about where the Warrior comes from. Even Vince McMahon makes fun of Warrior coming from another planet and whatnot. The thing is, these guys won't sit and rip into the fantastical traits of The Undertaker or Kane, so I don't think all this was necessary really. It's an exaggerated pro wrestling character, it's supposed to be a bit crazy. Bobby Heenan says Warrior was so stupid that even he didn't know where he came from, and no city wanted to be associated with him. We move on to the SummerSlam Honky Tonk Man IC title match, and to be fair, everyone says this was a great moment. It was a statement of dominance, and it made a lot of people backstage realize that Warrior could be the future of the company. No one can really rip this apart except the most die-hard Honky Tonk Man fans. This was a great moment in SummerSlam history, and the crowd couldn't get enough. Jim Ross then praises the overall presentation of the Warrior, how his high-impact moves made fans cheer, how good his colourful ring gear looked along with his matching face paint, and how easily marketable he was during the late 80s. Hulk Hogan basically says he was the right gimmick during the right time period, and Vince says a key ingredient of Warrior's success was how he captured the rebellious spirit of the late 80s. Then we take a look at Warrior's promos, and this is a part of the documentary that many people will remember. The Ultimate Warrior can cut a crazy, insane, and unintelligible promo, we all know that. But when they're put under a microscope and played one after another like this, it really is enough to make your brain melt. Bobby Heenan flat out says Warrior couldn't cut a promo, he didn't know what he was doing. Jim Ross says Warrior's promos really needed to be subtitled so a normal human being could understand what was being said. Lawler says the fans, and probably Hellwig himself, didn't know what the message was in the words spoken by the Warrior. Chris Jericho says he didn't understand the promos either, but it sounded cool. And Vince McMahon says the Warrior would go into a trance and almost speak in tongues. Hogan says Warrior was a good guy with a maniacal edge.
Wasn't that bad,
Flair says he never once cut a good promo because if he did, the nature...
Who gives a damn what you thought he cut?
And then Christian recreates the WrestleMania 6 promo, and it's so funny.
And you will soon be close to parts unknown.
That was good.
It's so good. Edge ends
that
this part of the show by saying maybe the tussles tied the Warrior's arms were cutting off the blood circulation to his head. So, just to recap, so far we have had a quick 2 minute look at Warrior before WWF.
How
The
was
guys
Jamie
who
West
praised
saying?
Warrior's look, his entrance, and his marketability as an original and colourful WWF superstar. We have also learned that Warrior couldn't work in the ring. He came from parts unknown, which, according to the guys interviewed, is stupid. And his promos were laughable because no one understood what Warrior was saying. We have also had people saying Hellwig didn't know how to cut a promo. The Ravishing Rick Rude rivalry's up next, and Hogan says Rude had to work his butt off to make the matches look good. Bruce Pritchard says Rude taught Warrior a lot in the ring, and he credits Rick for making Warrior look something like an athlete. And Jim Ross says the Rude matches were a testament to Ravishing Rick's patience. Bobby Heenan recalls Warrior dropping him with a press slam at WrestleMania, and he says Jim just didn't care if he hurt anyone or not. The Andre the Giant feud gets talked about next, and while Jim Ross says these matches helped establish Warrior as a big player in different markets, everyone else says Andre didn't care much for the Warrior, with Mean Gene saying he thinks it was Andre who put the kibosh on the rivalry. Heenan talked about how Andre used to like taking a clothesline bump where he fell into the ropes and he got himself tied up. He would duck the first clothesline, take 2 steps back, turn around, and then he'd take the second. Well, one night, Warrior didn't give Andre a chance to back off after ducking the first clothesline, and he smacked Andre with a clothesline when Andre wasn't prepared. Same thing happened the next night, only the clothesline was a little more stiff. So, in their next match, when Warrior came running in for the same spot, Andre put his fist out and he hit Warrior right between the eyes, causing Warrior's legs to buckle. Heenan says Warrior didn't know where he was after getting punched in the face. In the next match then, Warrior tiptoed to Andre when doing the clothesline spot, and Andre told Bobby he'll learn. Heenan reiterates that Andre didn't like Warrior at all as a person and as a performer before Ted DiBiase says
Ted DiBiase. Ted DiBiase has never liked the Warrior.
DiBiase believes that Warrior didn't appreciate anything Andre did for him in terms of raising his profile in WWF. The WrestleMania 6 Ultimate Challenge gets
I'm
covered
glad
next.
Warrior made that
Even
shoot
the guys
interview
getting interviewed
a couple months after
don't
this.
deny the importance of this match.
You used to cover
it's
that.
a WrestleMania main event for the ages. McMahon says that the popularity of both men made the main event very intriguing. Someone had to win. And
That was
someone had
that
to
was a
lose,
main event.
And it made for an unpredictable matchup. As soon as the footage ends of Warrior beating Hogan,
That
the
was a
talking
main
heads
event
start
there.
shitting on Warrior. Lawler says Warrior can't wrestle, which seemed to have nothing to do with the Mania match, and it was just put in there to set the tone. DiBiase says Warrior took directions well in the ring, which contradicts what Bobby Heenan says, but what I think DiBiase's getting at here is that Warrior needed someone to lead him. And Steve Lombardi says you really need to be someone special to beat Hulk Hogan during this era, hinting that the Warrior really wasn't all that special. Sergeant Slaughter isn't sure if this is the passing of the torch moment that everyone says
Like
it
it or
is.
not, he was
And Hogan
popular as
says
hell.
He knew the wrong decision
Like
was
it or
made,
not.
and everyone was watching him leave the ring at Mania instead of watching the new champ celebrate inside the ropes. Next up, we look at the Warrior feuding with Ted DiBiase, and remember how everyone ripped apart Warrior's promos earlier on? Yeah, well, they show the Warriors promo from the main event on November 23rd, 1990, and that promo, I thought, was actually good. Warrior talks about how money can't buy desire and how money doesn't equal the sacrifices Warrior made to become WWF champion. It's not a 10 out of 10 by any means, but I've always thought that this was one of Warrior's better promos, and it's a bit strange they included this one after burying his mic skills 20 minutes earlier. In regards to Randy Savage versus Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan says
Well, that was a
Macho
good
Man
one, too.
being such a meticulous detail freak may have been a good thing for the Ultimate Warrior, as it allowed Hellwig to have a more intricate match without anything getting called on the fly. Makes sense, I guess, but you could say this for absolutely anyone. Sergeant Slaughter says Warrior needed tamed in his matches and you couldn't let him get away with being too stiff. You had to bring him in sometimes and calm him down, but once you understood the animal, then you knew what to do. Slaughter says if guys like this listen, then good. If they don't listen, they get punished, and Warrior got punished quite a few times. At SummerSlam 1991, Warrior and Hogan took on the Triangle of Terror, the match made in hell. But backstage, Warrior demanded more money from McMahon, threatening not to work the match if he didn't get paid. Slaughter says Hulk was going around telling Sheik and others to break Warrior's leg.
And Warrior's
Hogan admits
DB
to suggesting to Vince that Warrior could be handled the old school way.
And Warrior said a lot of that stuff wasn't true. Then when they asked, in the Warrior shoot interview, they asked Hogan or somebody about some of that, and they said they don't remember it. They said that at the time it was what 10 or 15 years ago. Then it was 17 years ago. It's like still couldn't remember it or something like that. I was like, how do you not remember it? So, what the hell? I'm talking about they don't remember it.
Backstage, McMahon said no, he didn't want a lawsuit. Vince recalls agreeing to Warrior's terms, and Hogan recalls that, quote, the brother just didn't get it. Vince says that his responsibility is to provide the audience with advertised matches, so he reluctantly went through with it. But Vince couldn't wait to fire Warrior as soon as he stepped back through the curtain. Vince says he lived up to his word and he paid Warrior whatever it was he agreed to pay him. He can't remember how much it was, though Mean Gene says it was possibly $500,000 or even more. Slaughter and Hogan talk about also having issues with pay, but they went about it the right way without threatening to walk out of the company, while Ted DiBiase says the WWF pretty much gave Warrior everything he had, and Warrior slapped McMahon in the face by demanding more. DiBiase says Warrior's actions disgusted him on the night of SummerSlam 1991. So after this unprofessional act, the Warrior would lose a lot of momentum according to Jim Ross, but McMahon forgave Warrior and he brought him back to work. Warrior returned at WrestleMania 8 and Ted DiBiase said he couldn't believe it.
I remember that. When he came back, boy, I jumped out of that seat.
Was McMahon's ability to give people a second chance even when some guys really didn't deserve it. But McMahon argues again that his responsibility is to the fans and to give fans the best shows possible. So Warrior was back in the ring helping out Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. The legendary rumor of 1992 is then discussed. That rumor being that this was a different Ultimate Warrior.
I remember that was where he cut his hair
around the entire world the
and he got smaller.
In everyone's homes is incredible because
I think I fell for it too.
Yes,
we're talking about
its way over here.
Early 90s.
Edge talks about the rumor. He heard, like everyone else, that the real Warrior had died, and this was another guy playing the character, comparing it to the Paul McCartney
that was weird.
theories. Jericho points out the singlet that had muscles airbrushed on, which many people thought was ridiculous because Warrior was already really, really big. But Vince squashes the rumors by saying it was definitely Jim Hellwig who returned in 1992. The infamous Papa Shango rivalry then gets highlighted.
Remember all that?
Says the build-up was pretty good, but the matches were absolutely terrible. Jim Ross says Warrior had to lean into these more entertainment-based angles because he couldn't deliver in the ring. And McMahon curiously says that Warrior was shortcutting his way through WWF by taking part in these more time-consuming and elaborate storylines instead of learning his craft
I remember
in the ring
that.
and becoming a better performer.
That stuff coming out of his jacket.
Sure
I want
you're
that.
the one that booked this. You know what I mean? The random little insults come back next with Bobby Heenan saying Warrior had his own dressing room, as did Hogan, but Hogan would still let the boys come in and dress with him, whereas Warrior would not. Vince says there was a funny and generous side to Warrior that the didn't see. And the Brawler says,
yeah, I remember the locker room thing, but Warrior explained that too. He said he had to get his head right to turn into the Warrior, and he was getting focused back there. Can't be mad at him for that. But all this other stuff, I have no idea. But yeah, he said he's like he almost got into a different zone when he became the Warrior. Now I remember that because I don't know if the wrestling bios got if he covered the shoot interview with the Warrior because it came out like I don't know how many months after, like a few months after this. But yeah.
The Warrior would come in the building sometimes and not shake everyone's hand while complaining that he already shook everyone's hand the day before. I'm a bit 50-50 on that one. I was going to say it's dumb to shake your co-workers' hands every single day, but I'm not a wrestler and I'm not the one trusting other people not to injure me every night of the week, so none of us can really comment on that. Warrior's 1992 exit from the WWF is only briefly touched upon. Bruce Pritchard says the rumors of Warrior not wanting to work with Nails were not true, and McMahon says Warrior was let go due to failing a wellness test. Eric Bischoff joins the presentation to make fun of Warrior changing his legal name to Warrior. Lawler says Jim's kids would be Little Warriors and his wife would be Mrs. Warrior. And McMahon thinks
wants to
that
change
Jim
his name.
So
that's his
Vince
business.
have a hold on him in terms of intellectual property. The thing is, though, changing your name doesn't alter a thing in that regard, so Vince thinks it was another big misstep from Hellwig. Heenan says that he'll maybe change his name to Weasel. Ted DiBiase says he just doesn't get it. Jim Ross returns to say it's a bit weird, and Lawler comes back to say this is an example of a guy believing his own publicity. Bruce Pritchard adds that Jim Hellwig didn't even know who he was, and the man had real trouble separating reality from fiction. The 1996
They
return
really thought
gets
he went
covered
in the
next
street
week.
hollering
McMahon
and
says
screaming.
people
How about
wonder
that?
why he keeps bringing this, quote, nutcase back, but again, McMahon thought it was the right thing for the audience, and he felt Warrior still had some juice left in him. Pritchard says the Warrior was an investment, a character WWF put a lot of money into over the years, so it made sense to try and get something out of it. But the other guys interviewed say that it just wasn't the same because those young fans had maybe moved on from before, or the fans who stuck around had started getting behind other wrestlers instead.
I was happy to see him back. I remember that.
Pritchard says the Mania 12 squash match was put together to see if fans still
That was
wanted
90
to see the Warrior in the judge.
That was 96. We were very close, which I still hate that. I wish it had happened. We were very close to getting Ultimate Warrior versus Stone Cold. It was very close to happening. Because if he was there at least 97, we would have seen it. That would have been something serious.
His popularity in 1996. Triple H says he was the one chosen to have this Warrior return match, and Hunter says
he was talking shit too.
12, he got to find out, quote, how much of a dickwad the Warrior really was.
He can't talk,
Says
especially
he's one
back
of the
then.
most
The young Triple
guys
H, anyway.
he's ever worked with. Triple H went to the ring and he did what he had to do to the best of his ability.
Triple H
Hunter
can't
looks
talk
back
worth
and
of
he
shit
says,
about
on
what
one
happened.
hand, it was great because it was his first WrestleMania and he went up against a legend of WrestleMania. But Hunter says, on the other hand, that same WrestleMania legend ruined the experience for him. Jerry Lawler talks about the episode of Raw where the King wanted to present Warrior with a framed painting, and Warrior came out wearing a baseball cap. Jerry says Warrior never.
The hat thing, I'll give it to you. The hat was kind of weird.
The King thinks it took a lot of the impact out of the end of the promo and the scheduled King of the Ring match between the two. Keep in mind though, Warrior was promoting his comic book, and the cap had the same logo as the comic, so consider that too. Jim Ross says that the Warrior was then missing dates, and it's at this point where WWE show a doctored poster featuring Warrior headlining an Attitude Adjustment house show. Warrior was never featured on the poster in the first place. Shawn Michaels was on all versions. And if you look closely, whoever photoshopped the Warrior poster forgot to remove the Federation title match tag, and it also says that Warrior's WWF champion. It's this kind of stuff that puts me off these kind of documentaries, and it's blatant bullshit.
Photoshopping back in the 90s.
They really were. Still, though, Warrior didn't show up for events, and we see the public announcement made by Gorilla Monsoon that the Warrior's been suspended. McMahon says instead of doing what's best for his audience, he would be doing a disservice to his audience by promoting someone who isn't going to show up. Warrior apparently took time off because his dad passed away, but Vince argues that Warrior hadn't spoken to his father in 10 years, and Warrior couldn't have cared less about his dad either. Vince McMahon thought this was an excuse, so the suspension became a termination, and Warrior fired back by filing a lawsuit for the Ultimate Warrior name. I need to point out here too that Warrior has argued quite a few statements on this DVD. For example, the 1991 SummerSlam fiasco where Warrior held Vince up for money. Warrior said that he was demanding money that was owed to him from WrestleMania 7 a year prior, and also with this 1996 walkout, Warrior said there was a breach of contract on McMahon's side in terms of merchandise sales. But if I went through all of Warrior's rebuttals, this would be an hour-long video. I'm just keeping to what's said on the DVD here. In terms of owning his own name, the court ruled that Warrior was legally entitled to use the gimmick, the costuming, the face paint designs, and mannerisms of the Warrior character. So that means Jim could make money from the Warrior gimmick through any means he wanted, really, including other wrestling promotions. Ric Flair says he didn't know about the lawsuit, and it makes the Nature Boy think even less of the Ultimate Warrior. Bobby Heenan says without WWF, Jim would be absolutely nothing, and he wonders what Warrior would do for a living if it wasn't for Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Hogan and Eric Bischoff admit that the Renegade character in WCW was a scam.
They lied about that. So that had nothing to do with the Warrior. Yes, it did.
Though, the Ultimate Warrior showed up in WCW for his last run, and Bischoff thought it would be good for WCW, saying as there was interest in established characters coming to TNT. Bischoff also says that Warrior's debut entrance on Nitro went over really well with fans, and the reaction was good. He's not lying either. It came across really well on TV. Hogan says
that was something. I never thought I'd see him again when he showed up.
By saying Hogan's never beaten the Warrior, but again, I don't see the problem in that. And also, Warrior certainly wasn't the first nor the last to say that their upcoming opponent has never beaten them before, you know. Bischoff says Warrior rambled on for 10 minutes and he remembers Warrior going into business for himself and not shutting up. Hogan says Vince must have been laughing his ass off when he watched this, and Mean Gene says it was painful to sit through. We go to the brutal Halloween Havoc 1998 match, and Mean Gene says
Warrior
he
himself
never
even said the
wanna
match
make
was
up for
so.
WrestleMania
I'll give you
6 by
that
having
too.
another match in another company years down the road. We all know how bad this match was.
Yeah, he even said that
agrees
himself.
with the critics. He says it's
I'll give you
awful
that.
too. Hogan admits that it was he who messed everything up. The idea was to have Warrior wrestle the end of the match blind.
Didn't Hogan
to
burn
the
himself?
paper spot, but Hogan botched it and he singed his own eyebrows.
Yeah, he
and
burned
mustache
himself.
instead. Brilliant. So Warrior, of course, didn't wrestle the rest of the match blind. Mean Gene says both men had terrible timing at Halloween Havoc. Bischoff says that Hogan needs someone who complements his style and character, and Warrior just wasn't that guy. Eric says the match stunk so bad that you could smell it all the way down the Las Vegas Strip. Hogan reveals that Bischoff wanted to renegotiate a new contract with Warrior, and his number
Yeah, well,
was
Warrior
just
did say
too
that
high.
he said the
Bischoff
match.
says Warrior's
He said the match was
desires
brutal.
didn't align
He
with
did.
what Eric had in mind,
He said
so
it was
Warrior would leave
terrible.
World Championship Wrestling. The DVD wraps up with more insults, pretty much. Mean Gene's surprised that Warrior speaks at colleges. Jim Ross says he'd love to attend one of Warrior's lectures just to see if Ross can now
The man doesn't run down
what
the
he's talking about at this current stage in his life. And Eric Bischoff says that these...
The man doesn't run down the street screaming and hollering. No, but that's like saying Kane walks outside, chokes claiming people or setting them on fire. Come on now, know about that. That's like being about as bad as a fan now. Thinking the man goes to a college and starts hollering and screaming. Know about that.
speeches that Warrior gives are whack, and there's probably
Even though
a lot
Warrior
of
had that
people
TV
reading
show,
these lectures wondering what the
he was
hell
trying to
they
help
just
those
listened
guys.
to. Ted DiBiase says Warrior left a legacy in wrestling, and it's not a good one. Bobby Heenan says Warrior's one of the very few men in the wrestling industry that absolutely nobody likes. No one wanted to be around him, and no one wanted to work with him.
That's not true.
Bischoff's closing statements on the Warrior is that the man portraying the character let his ego get in the way of being a true legend of the business. Ric Flair says Warrior was a
He is a
flash in the
legend.
pan before leaving his seat, and things get a little more complimentary when Vince says the fans will
Yeah,
remember
and
Warrior
Flair
as
can't
someone
talk
with
shit.
a lot
Flair
of
be,
energy and someone
what did
fans
he do?
admire.
Pull out his
Christian
P-dog,
says
wanted the woman to
Warrior
look
wasn't
at
the
it.
best
How about
in-ring
that?
performer, but he
He
had
can't
something
talk
bigger
about
than that,
doing
and
dirt
that's
or
what
doing
made him a
whatever.
star. And Chris Jericho says that Warrior was
Pull-
unique
pull-
and maybe
pull his
underrated
pants and
because
wanted
he could
the
put
woman
on
to
a
see
decent
something.
match when he wanted to. The show fades to black.
Didn't
and
jump
check
up on
this
the bar
out,
and pulling
WWE
your
had to
pants.
put this trademark notice on the presentation. As mentioned at the top of this video, Warrior watched the DVD, he filed a lawsuit, and it took around 3 years for a court to dismiss the case. So, what are your thoughts on the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior? Personally,
shouldn't have
I
happened.
think
That's my
the
thoughts.
WWE were so hell-bent on showing Warrior in a bad light that they also presented themselves in a bad light. There's some pettiness here for sure, but the WWE also inadvertently shit all over their own history by saying the guy who headlined their shows and was a top draw for years was actually a horrible, unprofessional human being who no one wanted to work with. Think of a fan who's never watched WrestleMania 6, but they watched this DVD beforehand. That's going to make that fan look at Hogan vs. Warrior in a complete different way, and maybe the match then loses the magic that made it so important. Others will say, yeah, Warrior deserved it and screw WWE too. No one cares about what these reprobates got up to in the 80s, and no one should be watching that old 80s and 90s Wild West WWF crap anyway. It's a tough one for sure, but there are times when you watch this where it feels like the guys getting interviewed are just rubbing more and more salt in the wounds, and the random cutaways, the random insults is kinda jarring at times. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. This documentary has not been uploaded to WWE streaming services, and the Warrior.
No, that ain't gonna- that's not gonna happen.
Before his
I
passing, so it's one of those
I agree on that. It's not
presentations
gonna happen.
The company would want fans to forget. Warrior's now celebrated in WWE, and again, this causes controversy too. But it's also quite telling how quick the company flip-flops when it comes to their history with certain superstars. Thanks for watching, everyone, and take care.
Yeah, some of this stuff is shit. He doesn't like this. He doesn't like that. Shane, I think Shane and somebody else brought it up about when he won that belt from Hogan. So he went to the locker room and broke down. He couldn't believe it because and Warrior said in the other DVD, that's one of the goals is to get to the highest level as a world champion, which is true. and he got there. I think Intercontinental Champion twice and the World the Heavyweight Champion once. So he got to he said that's the top goal. He became the top dog at the time. So, and then like I said, he doesn't know how to do this and do that. He doesn't have to do all that. He was a superhero / power wrestler, like the power slams and the bear hugs and all that. And he even talked about stuff going into a match and all that kind of stuff. But every wrestler, I said that. I know he sounded like a repeat. It's on repeat. If every wrestler wrestled the same, it would get boring. You can't tell me it wouldn't. Okay, having 100 Hogans or 100 Bretts or 100 Steamboats. Know about that? Like every wrestler is different. So, boy, this was really something, boy. 'Cause I remember I got that DVD. I knew what it was about at the time. Then you watch it and you're like, then when you made that shoot interview, which is on YouTube somewhere, I think it's still there probably. Like 4 or 5 months after that, he spoke his piece and he gave him hell. He wasn't having it. He had to get a lot of people straight on that DVD. And y'all look it up if y'all never seen it, but it's should be online. It's probably still there. I think it probably got uploaded more than once, but it's still there somewhere. But yeah, like that dude said in the other video, he's like, talk about a hit job. And this guy wasn't even a big Warrior fan, and it was pissing him off. And I said, damn.